They swiped right, they dressed up, smiled, showed up, but they didn't come back the same. Some first dates end with a kiss. Others end with a door that never opens again. Welcome back to Hollow Testament. Tonight's stories come from dim-lit restaurants, quiet cars, and late-night messages, where love met fear and curiosity turned into regret. If you've ever had a date that gave you the chills, you're not alone. These are the dating stories they won't talk about, but we will. Okay, so I've always been a little bit of a pushover, especially when it comes to dating. I want to be liked, you know? I try to be agreeable, even if it means compromising on things that are important to me. This is the story of how that almost got me killed. Seriously. It started online. I was on one of those apps, not Tinder, something a little more niche, geared towards people with specific interests. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to give them any free advertising. Anyway, I matched with a guy named Daniel. He was cute in a kind of rugged, outdoorsy way. He had pictures of himself hiking, rock climbing, and even one holding a ridiculously large fish. He seemed adventurous, I guess. Our initial conversations were pretty normal. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, the usual getting to know you stuff. He was complimentary, told me I had beautiful eyes and a great sense of humor. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a couple of weeks of chatting, he suggested we meet up. He proposed a hiking trip, which, okay, red flag number one that I completely ignored. I'm not a huge hiker. I mean, I can walk around a park, no problem, but scaling a mountain? Not really my thing. I told him this, but he was so insistent. He said it would be a great way to get to know each other, that the views were amazing and that he'd take care of everything. He'd pack the food, bring the water, even lend me hiking boots. I felt pressured, but I also didn't want to seem like I was being difficult. So, I agreed. The day of the hike, he picked me up in his beat-up truck. It smelled like wet dog and stale cigarettes. He had a huge backpack in the back, overflowing with gear. He handed me a pair of hiking boots that were at least 2 sizes too big. I tried to tell him they didn't fit, but he just shrugged and said I could wear extra socks. The drive to the trailhead was awkward. He didn't really talk, just kept glancing at me with this intense, almost unsettling look. I tried to make conversation, but he gave short, clipped answers. I started to feel a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The hike itself was even worse than I imagined. The trail was steep and rocky, and the oversized boots were killing my feet. I kept tripping and stumbling, and Daniel just kept pushing ahead, barely stopping to check on me. He'd said it was a moderate hike, but it felt like we were climbing Mount Everest. After a couple of hours, I was exhausted and miserable. I told him I needed to stop, that I couldn't go any further. He seemed annoyed, but he finally agreed to take a break. We found a small clearing with a view of the valley below. It was pretty, I guess, but I was too tired and sore to appreciate it. He pulled out some sandwiches from his backpack. They were just plain ham and cheese on white bread. No condiments. Nothing. He handed me one, and I took a bite. The ham tasted off, like it had been sitting out too long. I tried to discreetly spit it out when he wasn't looking. That's when things took a turn for the truly terrifying. He started talking about how much he loved the wilderness, how it was the only place he felt truly free. He said society was corrupt and that people were weak and easily manipulated. He started going on about survivalism, prepping, and how the world was going to end soon. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept getting more and more intense, his eyes practically glowing with fanaticism. He told me he had been preparing for the end times for years, that he had a hidden bunker stocked with supplies, and that he was looking for someone to share it with. That's when I realized I was in serious trouble. He wasn't just weird, he was delusional, and I was alone with him, miles from civilization with no cell service. My heart started pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there. I told him I needed to go to the bathroom and started walking away from the clearing. He didn't try to stop me, but he kept watching me with those intense eyes. I walked as fast as I could, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I didn't go to the bathroom. I ran. I ran as fast as my aching legs would carry me, tripping and stumbling over rocks and roots. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from him. I could hear him calling after me, his voice getting closer. "Where are you going? I'm trying to save you." I didn't look back. I just kept running. Eventually, I stumbled onto another trail, one that seemed less steep and more well-maintained. I followed it for what felt like hours until I finally reached the trailhead. I practically collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. I managed to flag down a passing car, a family on vacation. I told them what happened, and they were kind enough to drive me to the nearest town. I went straight to the police station and reported the incident. They took my statement, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said Daniel probably just had some eccentric beliefs and that I was overreacting. They promised to look into it, but I never heard from them again. I never saw Daniel again either. I blocked him on the app, deleted my profile, and basically went into hiding for a while. I was terrified that he would find me, that he would come after me. It's been a few years since then, and I'm still shaken up by the experience. I'm much more cautious about who I meet online, and I definitely don't go on hikes with strangers anymore. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting my gut and not being afraid to say no, even if it means disappointing someone. My desire to be agreeable almost cost me my life. Story number 2. Okay, so this is a story I still have trouble talking about, but I need to get it out there. And trust me, it's 100% true. It happened to me just a few months ago. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship and was feeling lonely and, honestly, pretty insecure. A friend convinced me to try online dating, saying it was a good way to meet new people and boost my confidence. I was hesitant, but eventually I caved and made a profile on one of the mainstream dating apps. I swiped through countless faces, the whole process feeling incredibly superficial and draining. Then I matched with Liam. His profile seemed normal enough. Hiking photos, a picture with his dog, a witty bio about loving good food and bad puns. We started chatting, and he was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our hobbies, our families, our dreams for the future. He seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. After a week of texting, he asked me out on a date. We decided to meet at a local coffee shop. I was nervous, but also excited. When I saw him, I was instantly relieved. He looked exactly like his pictures, maybe even better in person. The date went incredibly well. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He was attentive, kind, and made me feel incredibly comfortable. It felt like I had known him forever. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Every date was amazing. He always knew how to make me laugh, how to make me feel special. He was incredibly romantic, showering me with compliments, gifts, and affection. I fell hard, and I fell fast. Looking back, I realize how quickly things escalated, how easily I ignored the little red flags that started popping up. He was always a little too eager, a little too intense. He wanted to spend every waking moment with me and got visibly upset if I had other plans. He started isolating me from my friends, subtly criticizing them and making me feel guilty for spending time with them instead of him. He'd say things like, "They don't understand us," or "I'm the only one who truly cares about you." I started feeling trapped, but I told myself it was just because he loved me so much. I rationalized his behavior, convincing myself that I was lucky to have someone who cared so deeply. Then came the arguments. They started small, petty disagreements that quickly spiraled out of control. He'd accuse me of flirting with other men, of not appreciating him enough, of not loving him as much as he loved me. He had a way of twisting my words, of making me feel like I was always in the wrong. I started walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might upset him. He'd often apologize after these outbursts, showering me with affection and promises to do better. And I would forgive him, every time. I wanted to believe him, to believe that he could change. The abuse escalated. The verbal attacks became more frequent and more vicious. He'd call me names, insult my appearance, and tear down my self-esteem. He started controlling my finances, demanding to know where I was spending my money and criticizing my spending habits. One night, after a particularly nasty argument, he pushed me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to knock me off balance. I was terrified. I knew I had to get out. I tried to break up with him, but he wouldn't let me. He begged, pleaded, and threatened. He told me he couldn't live without me, that he would kill himself if I left him. I was scared, but I knew I couldn't stay. I confided in my best friend, Sarah, and she helped me come up with a plan. We packed my belongings while he was at work, and I moved into her apartment. I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, and cut off all contact. I was terrified he would find me, but Sarah assured me that I was safe. For weeks, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. I had nightmares about him breaking into Sarah's apartment. Slowly, I started to heal. I started therapy, which helped me process the trauma and rebuild my self-esteem. It's been a few months since I left him, and I'm still struggling. I have trust issues and find it hard to open up to new people. But I'm getting better, day by day. I learned a valuable lesson, that love shouldn't hurt, and that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. My story is a real dating story. One of my friends had this experience. Dating is scary. Here's another story, and this one is also true. This is based on recent real-life dating horror stories. I stumbled upon this story on Reddit, and it haunted me for days. It was about a woman named Emily who met a man named David on a dating app. He seemed charming and successful, a real catch. They went on a few dates, and Emily was smitten. He was everything she thought she wanted in a partner. But then, things started to get weird. David started asking her about her work, her colleagues, and her company's financial situation. He seemed overly interested in her professional life, which she initially brushed off as him being supportive. One night, after a few drinks, David pressed her for information about a confidential project she was working on. Emily hesitated, explaining that she couldn't disclose such information. David became angry, accusing her of not trusting him and of not valuing their relationship. He said that if she truly loved him, she would share everything with him. Emily, feeling pressured and wanting to please him, eventually caved and revealed some details about the project. The next day, Emily was called into her boss's office. She was accused of leaking confidential information to a competitor. She was shocked and confused, denying the allegations. But the evidence was overwhelming. Someone had provided detailed information about the project to a rival company, and the information matched what Emily had told David. Emily was fired on the spot. She was devastated, not only because she had lost her job, but also because she had been betrayed by someone she thought she loved. She confronted David, who initially denied everything, but eventually, he confessed. He admitted that he had been using her to get information for his own personal gain. He was working for the rival company and had specifically targeted Emily to get access to her company's secrets. Emily was heartbroken and disgusted. She reported David to the authorities, but he had already disappeared. She was left with nothing, no job, no reputation, and a broken heart. This story is a stark reminder of the dangers of online dating and the importance of being cautious about who you trust. People aren't always who they seem to be, and some people are capable of incredibly cruel and deceptive behavior. This is true. These real dating stories are scary and should be taken seriously. Dating in modern years is hard. These stories aren't meant to scare you away from dating, but hopefully serves as a cautionary tale. Remember to trust your instincts, set boundaries, and prioritize your safety. If something feels off, it probably is. And never be afraid to seek help from friends, family, or a professional if you find yourself in a dangerous or uncomfortable situation. Stay safe. Story number 3. Okay, here are 2 dating horror stories, both presented as true accounts, with the kind of unsettling details and emotional impact you requested. I've drawn inspiration from the style of some of the more compelling Reddit stories and tried to ground them in realistic, modern dating scenarios. Story 1, the Airbnb date, true story. I swear, every time I think about it, my stomach still does a little flip. This happened about 2 years ago. I'd been single for a while and decided to try online dating again. I met Mark on Hinge. He seemed normal, maybe a little too into fitness, but otherwise, he had a decent job, liked hiking, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We texted for a week or so, and he suggested we go on a date. But not just any date. He said he had this amazing idea. He'd rented an Airbnb out in the woods, a cozy cabin for the weekend, and he thought it would be the perfect romantic first date. Now, alarm bells should have been ringing. A weekend trip with a guy I'd never met? Huge red flag. But I was also kind of flattered. And honestly, I was bored. My life felt like it was stuck on repeat, and the idea of escaping to a cabin in the woods sounded incredibly appealing. I told a few friends about it, sent them his picture and the address of the Airbnb, and promised to check in regularly. I thought I was being safe. The cabin itself was beautiful, exactly as pictured online, rustic, with a huge stone fireplace and a view of the forest. Mark was attentive, maybe a little too attentive. He kept refilling my wine glass, complimenting me incessantly and generally hovering, but I chalked it up to nerves and tried to relax. We made dinner together, listened to music, and talked. He was charming, funny even. That night, we sat by the fire, and he started getting more intimate. I wasn't ready for that, not on a first date. I politely but firmly told him I wanted to take things slow. He seemed disappointed, but he said he understood. He even apologized for coming on too strong. I started to relax a little. Maybe I was wrong about him. We went to bed in separate rooms, and that's when things started to get weird. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise, a faint scratching sound coming from outside my window. I dismissed it as an animal, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. But the scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. It sounded like someone was dragging their fingernails across the glass. I finally got up and peeked out the window. Nothing, just the dark, silent forest. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the window. I got dressed and went to find Mark. He was in the kitchen, making breakfast. He seemed perfectly normal, cheerful even. I asked him if he'd heard any noises during the night. He said he hadn't. I shrugged it off, thinking I must have imagined it. We ate breakfast, and he suggested we go for a hike. I agreed. We walked for hours, deep into the woods. The trail became increasingly narrow and overgrown. I started to feel uneasy. We were completely isolated, miles from civilization. I told Mark I wanted to turn back. He insisted we keep going, that there was a beautiful waterfall just a little further ahead. I hesitated, but I trusted him. Big mistake. We finally reached the waterfall. It was more like a trickle of water running down a mossy rock. I was annoyed, but I didn't say anything. Mark turned to me, a strange look in his eyes. He started talking about how much he liked me, how he knew we were meant to be together. It was intense, unnerving. I tried to politely extricate myself from the situation, but he wouldn't let me. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice low and husky. "I just want you to understand how I feel." I tried to pull away, but he held on tight. He started to lean in, trying to kiss me. I panicked. I kneed him in the groin, and he stumbled backward, releasing my arm. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran as fast as I could, back the way we came. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush. I didn't dare look back. I ran until I reached the main trail. Then I kept running until I saw the cabin in the distance. I ran inside, locked the door, and called for an Uber. I didn't wait for Mark. I packed my bag and left. I blocked him on everything, but for weeks afterward, I kept seeing him, or thinking I saw him, a man who looked like him at the grocery store, in traffic, on the street. I was terrified. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and started carrying pepper spray. I thought it was just my imagination until I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of me sleeping in the cabin. It was taken through the window, from outside. On the back, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "I'm always watching." I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I'm still scared. I still look over my shoulder. I'll never trust a man again, not completely. And I'll definitely never go on a weekend trip with someone I just met online. Story 2. The Voice Note, based on real stories. This happened last year, during that whole pandemic dating craziness. Everyone was so isolated, and I think it made people act stranger than usual. I matched with this guy, Liam, on Bumble. He seemed really cool. He was a musician, which I always find attractive, and his profile was full of artsy photos and thoughtful quotes. We started chatting, and we really hit it off. We talked about music, movies, books, everything. He was incredibly articulate and insightful, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After a few days of chatting, he asked if I wanted to move things off the app. We exchanged numbers, and he started sending me voice notes instead of texts. I actually really liked the voice notes. It felt more personal than texting, more intimate. I could hear the emotion in his voice, the way he paused and considered his words. It felt like we were really connecting. He would talk about his music, his struggles, his dreams. He was very vulnerable, which I appreciated. After a week or so of voice notes, he asked if I wanted to meet up. I was hesitant. I'd never met anyone who communicated primarily through voice notes. It felt a little unconventional, but I was also intrigued. I decided to take a chance. We met at a coffee shop. He looked exactly like his pictures, maybe even better in person. He was charming, funny, and engaging. The date went really well. We talked for hours, and I felt like I'd known him forever. He walked me home, and we kissed goodnight. After that, we started seeing each other regularly. He was always sending me voice notes, even when we were apart. He'd send them in the middle of the night, when he couldn't sleep. He'd send them when he was feeling down. He'd send them when he was thinking about me. The voice notes started to become more intense. He started talking about how much he needed me, how I was the only person who understood him. He'd say things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and "You're my everything." I started to feel a little overwhelmed. It was a lot of pressure, especially since we'd only been dating for a few weeks. I tried to gently push back to set some boundaries, but he didn't seem to hear me. He just kept sending the voice notes, pouring out his heart. One night, I got a voice note from him that really freaked me out. He was crying, and his voice was slurred. He said he was feeling lost and alone, and that he didn't know if he could go on. He said he needed me, that I was the only thing keeping him alive. I was terrified. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I sent him a text, but he didn't respond. I drove to his apartment, but he wasn't there. I didn't know what to do. I called his friends, but they hadn't heard from him either. I spent the entire night worrying about him, convinced that something terrible had happened. The next morning, I finally got a text from him. He said he was fine, that he'd just had a rough night. He apologized for scaring me, said he didn't mean to put so much pressure on me. I was relieved, but I was also angry. He'd put me through hell, and he didn't even seem to realize how much he'd scared me. I told him I needed some space, that I couldn't handle that level of intensity. He seemed hurt, but he said he understood. I took a few days to myself, trying to process everything that had happened. I decided that I needed to break up with him. It was too much, too soon. I couldn't handle his emotional instability. I called him and told him it was over. He didn't take it well. He started crying, begging me to reconsider. He said he couldn't live without me, that I was making a huge mistake. I stood my ground. I told him I was sorry, but that it was over. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I thought that was the end of it. I thought it was just my imagination until a few weeks later, I started getting anonymous voice notes. They were always late at night, and they were always the same. Just the sound of someone breathing heavily, punctuated by occasional whispers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was always menacing. I changed my number, but the voice notes kept coming. I tried to ignore them, but they were always there, lurking in the background, making me feel like I was being watched. I still get them sometimes, even now. I don't know who's sending them or why, but I know it's him. I can hear it in the breathing, the lingering echo of desperation and hurt that I was so familiar with. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most charming voices can hide the darkest intentions, and that breaking up doesn't always mean it's over. Story number 4. Okay, so I need to tell you about this absolute train wreck of a relationship I had a few years back. Looking back, all the red flags were there, waving like goddamn cheering squads, but I was so blinded by, I don't even know what, loneliness, desperation, a misplaced belief in the inherent goodness of people, that I ignored them all. This is a true story, by the way. I even saw something similar on Reddit a while back about a woman who dated a guy who slowly isolated her from her friends. Mine wasn't quite as extreme, but the manipulation was definitely there. It started innocently enough. I met Ben on a dating app, I'm too embarrassed to say which one, and he seemed normal. Attractive, good job, shared some of my interests. Our first few dates were actually pretty great. We went to see a band I liked, hiked in the hills, and had some genuinely good conversations. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I was starting to think I'd actually found a decent guy. The first subtle red flag popped up maybe a month in. I had plans to go out with my best friend, Sarah, for her birthday. I'd told Ben about it weeks in advance, and he'd seemed totally cool. But the day of, he started texting me constantly. Just little things like, "Are you having fun?" and "Wish you were here." But they were relentless. I ended up spending half the night on my phone, responding to him instead of actually celebrating with Sarah. When I got home, Ben was waiting for me outside my apartment. He said he just missed me and wanted to make sure I got home safe. I thought it was sweet at the time, but looking back, it was textbook controlling behavior. Things just spiraled from there. He started making little digs at my friends, saying they were bad influences or that they didn't really care about me. He always framed it as concern, like he was just looking out for me. But slowly, I started seeing my friends less and less. I'd make excuses, saying I was busy or tired, but really, I just didn't want to deal with Ben's passive-aggressive comments. He also started becoming increasingly critical of my appearance. He'd make comments about what I was wearing, saying certain outfits were too revealing or that I looked better in other things. Again, he framed it as caring, saying he just wanted me to look my best. But it chipped away at my self-esteem, and I started dressing the way he wanted me to, just to avoid the criticism. The worst part was the gaslighting. If I ever confronted him about his behavior, he'd deny everything. He'd say I was being too sensitive or that I was misunderstanding him. He was so good at twisting things around that I started to doubt my own sanity. I genuinely believed I was the one who was crazy. I remember one specific incident where I brought up how he always seemed to make plans that conflicted with my family dinners. He completely denied it, saying I was imagining things and that he loved spending time with my family. But I knew he was lying. I had calendar reminders. He knew about those dinners weeks in advance. This went on for almost a year. I was completely isolated from my friends and family, constantly walking on eggshells and questioning my own reality. I was a shell of my former self. I was depressed, anxious, and completely dependent on Ben for validation. The breaking point came during a vacation we took together. We were supposed to be celebrating our 1-year anniversary, but it turned into a nightmare. He was constantly on my case, criticizing everything I did, from the way I packed my suitcase to the way I ordered my food. One night, we got into a huge argument in our hotel room. I don't even remember what it was about, but it escalated quickly. He started yelling at me, calling me names, and telling me I was worthless and that no one else would ever love me. I was terrified. I packed my bags and booked a flight home the next morning. I left without even saying goodbye. It took me a long time to recover from that relationship. I went to therapy, reconnected with my friends and family, and slowly started rebuilding my life. It was like coming out of a fog. I realized how much I had lost myself in that relationship and how much damage Ben had done to my self-esteem. I still struggle with trust issues, and I'm definitely more cautious when it comes to dating, but I've learned some valuable lessons. I know what red flags to look out for, and I'm not afraid to walk away from a situation that feels wrong. I also know that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, and that I'm not responsible for someone else's happiness. I'm sharing this story because I know a lot of people experience similar things. According to recent articles, these kinds of controlling relationships are becoming more and more common, especially with the rise of online dating. It's so important to trust your gut and recognize the warning signs. Don't ignore the red flags, no matter how charming or convincing someone might seem. Your mental health and well-being are worth more than any relationship. Story number 5. Okay, so I'm going to tell you 2 stories, and I swear on my life, these are true. The first one I experienced myself. The second one happened to a friend of a friend, but it's been verified through multiple sources, and it's a well-known cautionary tale in our circles. I still get chills thinking about either of these. Both are dating horror stories that turned into something far more sinister. Story 1, The Collector. True story, my experience. I was fresh out of a bad breakup, feeling vulnerable and stupidly optimistic about finding someone new. I downloaded Bumble, figured I'd give it a shot. Matched with a guy named Ethan, a photographer. His profile was artsy, full of black and white portraits and landscape shots. He seemed interesting, intelligent. We messaged back and forth for a week, had some really good conversations about art, film, life philosophies. He seemed genuine. We met for coffee. He was even more attractive in person. Tall, dark hair, intense eyes. The conversation flowed easily, and we ended up talking for hours. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my dreams, my fears, my family. I felt like I was actually connecting with someone for the first time in a long time. We started dating. Dinners, movies, walks in the park. He always paid attention to detail. Remembered my favorite flowers, my preferred coffee order, little things that showed he was actually listening. He was almost too perfect. Then things started getting weird. He started taking photos of me, seemingly without me noticing. Candid shots while we were walking, eating, even just sitting and talking. I didn't think much of it at first. He was a photographer, after all. But the photos started getting more frequent, more intense. He'd zoom in on my face, capture me in what felt like vulnerable moments. He also started asking for mementos. A lock of my hair, a piece of jewelry I often wore, a t-shirt I had slept in. He said he wanted to capture memories and create art. I was hesitant, but he was so persuasive. And honestly, I was falling for him hard. So I gave him small things. Stupid, right? Then came the request for a journal. He knew I wrote in one, and he said he wanted to understand my inner world. That's when the alarm bells started going off in my head. I refused, point blank. He got angry, which was the first time I'd seen that side of him. He accused me of not trusting him, of holding back. I stood my ground, but the fight left me shaken. I started noticing things around his apartment. Photos of other women, hidden in drawers, tucked away in books. Similar photos to the ones he had taken of me. Candid, intimate, almost voyeuristic. And then I found the collection. In a locked box in his closet, he had small objects belonging to other women. A hair clip, a necklace, a scarf, a small vial of perfume. Each item meticulously labeled with a name and a date. It hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't a photographer, he was a collector. He was collecting pieces of us, like trophies. I broke up with him immediately. He didn't take it well. He stalked me for weeks, sending obsessive messages, showing up at my work, my apartment. I had to get a restraining order. The police investigated. They found more photos, more mementos belonging to other women. He was arrested, but the charges were relatively minor. Stalking, harassment. He got off with probation. I still think about him. I still wonder about those other women. I still feel the shame of being so easily manipulated, so blind to the red flags. I feel like I dodged a bullet. Story 2, The Vanishing Bride, based on real cases. This one is more of an urban legend in my town, but it's based on a few real dating app horror stories from recent years, where people disappeared after going on dates. It's about a woman named Sarah who met a guy on Hinge named David. He seemed normal enough. Good job, decent photos, witty profile. They chatted for a couple weeks before deciding to meet for a hike. Sarah told a few friends about the date and shared David's profile with them. She even sent them her location throughout the day, just in case. But after a few hours, her location stopped updating. Her friends tried calling and texting her, but she didn't respond. They waited a few more hours, then contacted the police. The police launched a search and rescue operation. They found Sarah's car parked at the trailhead, but there was no sign of her or David. Days turned into weeks. The search intensified. Eventually, they found David. He was living in a remote cabin in the woods miles from the trailhead. He claimed he had gotten lost and didn't have cell service. He said Sarah had gotten separated from him during the hike, and he assumed she had made it back to her car on her own. The police didn't believe him. They searched the cabin and the surrounding area. They found Sarah's phone buried in the backyard. They also found a hidden room in the basement. Inside the room, they found Sarah's body. She had been tortured and murdered. David was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The motive was never entirely clear. Some speculated he was a serial killer, preying on women he met online. Others believed he had a specific obsession with Sarah. The most disturbing part is that David seemed so normal. He had friends, a family, a steady job. No one suspected him of being capable of such violence. This story haunts me because it highlights the vulnerability of dating apps. You're meeting strangers, people you know nothing about. You're trusting them with your safety, your life. And sometimes that trust is misplaced. Why these stories resonate? Both of these stories are terrifying because they are grounded in reality. They show how easily people can be deceived, how quickly situations can escalate, and how devastating the consequences can be. They also highlight the psychological aspect of horror, the fear of the unknown, the feeling of being watched, the creeping realization that something is terribly wrong. These are all powerful and deeply unsettling emotions. I shared these with you because I want you to know you're not alone in replaying nightmares in your head after bad experiences. Dating can be a minefield. It can leave you feeling emotionally scarred and traumatized. Remember to trust your instincts. Don't ignore red flags, and always prioritize your safety, both online and in person. There is no date worth your life. Story number 6. I thought it was just my imagination until the third time I woke up to my closet door slightly ajar. I'd always been a bit of a light sleeper, prone to overthinking, so the initial creaks and bumps of my old apartment building hadn't really registered as anything out of the ordinary. But the closet? That was different. It was a walk-in, crammed with clothes, shoes, and the haphazard remnants of my life. I'd always made sure it was firmly shut before I went to sleep, mostly because I hated the clutter and the way it made the room feel smaller. The first time, I chalked it up to the building settling. The second time, I convinced myself I hadn't closed it properly. But the third time, a cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. It was a Tuesday night, a week after my first date with Ben. Ben, where do I even start? We met on Hinge. His profile was charming, a little quirky, hiking photos, a picture with his dog, a bio that mentioned his love for obscure indie films. He seemed normal, maybe even a little too good to be true. Our first date at a local brewery went surprisingly well. He was a good listener, he laughed at my jokes, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I ignored the slight feeling of being observed when he asked specifics about my apartment and my schedule. Maybe it was the loneliness talking, or the desire to finally find someone after a string of dating app disasters, but I let my guard down. I invited him back to my place that night. It felt right, or at least, that's what I told myself. Now looking back, the red flags were there from the start, subtle but persistent. The way he always managed to steer the conversation back to me, to my life, to my routines. The way he seemed to memorize every detail I told him, repeating them back to me later, not in a romantic way, but in a way that felt calculating. The compliments that bordered on obsessive, like when he told me he admired my dedication to order after noticing how neatly I organized my spice rack. After that first date, Ben started texting me constantly. Good morning texts, checking in texts throughout the day, good night texts. He wanted to see me every night. It was flattering at first, but quickly became overwhelming. I tried to create space, to explain that I needed time to myself, but he didn't seem to understand. He'd show up at my door with flowers, with takeout, with promises of a relaxing evening together. It was suffocating. That Tuesday night, after discovering the closet ajar for the third time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the building. I kept replaying the feeling of someone watching me when I first met him. The worst was when he said I was one of the prettiest girls he has ever seen. At around 3 a.m., I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the closet. I froze, paralyzed with fear. It sounded like fingernails scraping against the wooden floor. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight with terror. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. The operator answered, and I whispered my address, my voice barely audible. "I think someone's in my apartment," I managed to say before hanging up. I stayed huddled in bed, clutching my phone and listening to the scratching sound grow louder. It was getting closer to the door. I saw the door handle jiggle. Then the door slowly creaked open. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Ben. He stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway, his face obscured by shadows. He was wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. In his hand, he held a small silver object. "Ben?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. He took a step closer, and I could see the object in his hand more clearly. It was a small, antique mirror. "I just wanted to see you," he said, his voice low and raspy. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." "Safe?" I repeated, my mind racing. "You broke into my apartment." He didn't respond. He just kept staring at me, his eyes filled with an unsettling intensity. He got closer, closer, and closer. That was when the police sirens filled the air. Ben flinched and took a step back. He looked around the room, his eyes darting nervously. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have called them." Then he turned and ran, disappearing back into the closet. The police arrived moments later, guns drawn. They searched the apartment, but Ben was gone. They found a small hole in the back of my closet, leading to a crawl space that connected to the other apartments in the building. They never caught him. That was 6 months ago. I moved out of that apartment immediately and moved in with a friend. I changed my number, deleted my social media, and started seeing a therapist. I still have nightmares about Ben, about his eyes, about the scratching sound coming from the closet. I still jump at every unexpected noise. I haven't used a dating app since. I don't think I ever will again. I thought it was just my imagination, but it wasn't. It was real, and it almost cost me my life. This next story is true and happened in 2018, making it a very real modern-day horror story. My friend Sarah met a guy on Bumble. Let's call him Mark. He seemed perfectly normal at first. Attractive, employed, good conversationalist. They went on a few dates, and Sarah was really starting to fall for him. Then, things started getting weird. Mark became increasingly possessive and jealous. He'd constantly text her, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. He'd get angry if she didn't respond immediately. Sarah tried to brush it off, to tell herself that he was just really into her. But then he started showing up unannounced at her work, at her gym, at her apartment. He said he just wanted to surprise her, but it felt more like stalking. One night, Sarah went out with some friends. She told Mark she was going to a movie, but she actually went to a bar. Mark found out somehow. He showed up at the bar, screaming and yelling, accusing her of cheating. He made a huge scene, embarrassing Sarah in front of everyone. Sarah was terrified. She broke up with Mark that night and blocked him on all her social media accounts. But that wasn't the end of it. Mark started calling her repeatedly from different numbers. He'd leave threatening voicemails saying he was going to ruin her life. He started sending her disturbing messages online, using fake accounts. He even started harassing her friends and family. Sarah went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since he hadn't physically harmed her. They told her to get a restraining order. Sarah got a restraining order, but Mark violated it almost immediately. He started showing up outside her apartment again, just standing there, staring at her. Sarah was living in constant fear. She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat, she couldn't focus on anything. She was a prisoner in her own home. One night, she woke up to find Mark standing in her bedroom. He had broken into her apartment. Sarah screamed, and Mark lunged at her. He started choking her, telling her that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Sarah fought back with all her might. She scratched his face, kicked him in the groin, and finally managed to break free. She ran out of the apartment and called the police. This time, the police took Mark into custody. He was charged with assault, stalking, and violating a restraining order. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. Sarah is still traumatized by what happened. She has nightmares, anxiety, and trust issues. She's seeing a therapist and trying to rebuild her life. This is a true story. It's a reminder that dating app horror stories aren't always about physical violence. Sometimes they're about emotional abuse, stalking, and the terrifying realization that the person you thought you knew is actually a dangerous predator. Story number 7. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after years of trying to bury it, I think someone needs to hear what happened to me. This is a true story, though I've changed the names to protect everyone involved, really. It all started with a dating app, not Tinder, but something similar that was popular in my area. I was in my late 20s, recently divorced, and dipping my toes back into the dating pool. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to grab a drink with and maybe have some fun. I matched with a guy named Chris. He seemed normal enough, attractive, witty, and had a decent job. We chatted for a few days, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We decided to meet for drinks at a local bar. He was even more attractive in person, and the conversation flowed easily. We laughed, we flirted, and before I knew it, the night was over. He walked me back to my car, and we shared a kiss. It was a good kiss, and I was definitely interested in seeing him again. Things progressed quickly from there. We went on several more dates over the next few weeks. We went hiking, saw movies, and even cooked dinner at my place. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to really care about me. He was the kind of guy who would open doors for me, send me sweet texts in the morning, and always made sure I felt safe and comfortable. It felt like something from a movie. Then, things started to change. It started subtly at first. He'd get jealous if I mentioned other guys, even in passing. He'd ask me questions about my ex-husband, fishing for details about our relationship. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced, just to surprise me. I chalked it up to him being really into me, maybe a little insecure. I was wrong. One night, we were at my place watching a movie. I got up to get some water, and when I came back, he was going through my phone. I was furious. I demanded to know what he was doing, and he just shrugged it off, saying he was just curious. I told him he needed to leave. He refused. That's when I started to get scared. He became angry, his eyes turning cold. He started yelling at me, accusing me of cheating on him, of lying to him, of not really caring about him. I tried to reason with him, but it was like talking to a wall. He was completely irrational, consumed by jealousy and rage. He wouldn't let me leave the apartment. He blocked the door, refusing to let me pass. I tried to call for help, but he snatched my phone away and smashed it against the wall. I was trapped. What followed was a night of terror. He ranted and raved, pacing around the apartment like a caged animal. He threatened me, saying he would hurt me if I ever tried to leave him. He would then sob and beg me to forgive him. It was exhausting and terrifying. I honestly didn't know if I would make it out alive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he passed out on the couch. I waited for what felt like hours, listening to his heavy breathing, making sure he was really asleep. Then, as quietly as I could, I crept out of the apartment and ran to my neighbors. I called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They arrested Chris, and I pressed charges. It turned out he had a history of domestic violence, something he had conveniently left off his dating profile. The whole thing felt like a nightmare. The trial was a grueling process. I had to relive the entire experience over and over again. The emotional toll was immense, but I knew I had to do it, not just for myself, but for other women who might be in a similar situation. Chris was found guilty and sentenced to several years in prison. Even now, years later, I still struggle with the trauma of what happened. I have trouble trusting people, especially men. I'm always on edge, constantly scanning my surroundings for potential threats. I still wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by the memory of his angry face. This is a true story, and it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of online dating. You never really know who you're talking to behind a screen. Be careful, be vigilant, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I hope that my story can help someone else avoid the nightmare that I went through. Here is another one. This is also a true story. It's one of those real-life dating horror stories that feels like something out of a Lifetime movie. I've hesitated sharing because it's deeply personal and honestly still pretty traumatizing. But I think it's important for women to hear. I met David on a dating site geared toward people looking for serious relationships. He seemed like a catch. A successful professional, intelligent, traveled, and genuinely interested in settling down. He wasn't the hottest guy on the site, but he was kind, attentive, and said all the right things. We talked for weeks before meeting, and I felt like I really knew him. Our first date was amazing. We had dinner at a nice restaurant, and the conversation was effortless. He asked about my dreams, my family, my fears, the kind of stuff that makes you feel seen and understood. He even teared up when I told him about my grandmother's passing. I thought, wow, this is it. This is the one. For the next few months, things were perfect. We were inseparable. Weekends away, romantic dinners, meeting each other's families. He even started talking about marriage and kids. I was head over heels in love. Then, little things started to happen. Subtle red flags that, in retrospect, I should have paid more attention to. He started becoming controlling, wanting to know where I was at all times and who I was with. He'd get jealous if I spent time with my friends without him. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about my appearance or my career choices. I brushed it off, thinking it was just him being protective. One night, we were at a party, and I was talking to an old friend from college. David came over and pulled me away, his grip tight on my arm. He said I was flirting with my friend, which was ridiculous. I tried to explain that we were just catching up, but he wouldn't listen. He started yelling at me in front of everyone, accusing me of being unfaithful. I was mortified. We left the party, and the argument continued in the car. He was driving erratically, speeding and swerving. I was terrified. I begged him to slow down, but he just kept yelling and driving faster. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes, pulling the car over to the side of the road. He turned to me, his eyes filled with rage. He started screaming at me, saying I was a terrible person, that I didn't deserve him, that I was going to ruin his life. Then he hit me. It was a single, open-handed slap across the face, but it was enough to send me reeling. I was in shock. I couldn't believe he had just hit me. I opened the car door and ran. I ran as fast as I could, not knowing where I was going, just wanting to get away from him. He chased after me, grabbing me by the arm and dragging me back to the car. He forced me back into the car and drove me home, the entire ride in silence. When we got to my apartment, he apologized profusely, saying he didn't mean to hit me, that he was just stressed out, that it would never happen again. He begged me to forgive him. I was scared and confused. Part of me wanted to believe him, to forgive him. But another part of me knew that I had to get out. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell him where I was going. I just disappeared. I went to stay with my sister in another state. I reported the incident to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since it was just a single slap and there were no witnesses. I felt helpless. It took me a long time to recover from that relationship. I went to therapy, and I slowly started to rebuild my life. I learned to trust my instincts and to recognize the red flags early on. I'm sharing this story because I want other women to know that they're not alone. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of their background or education. It's important to be aware of the signs and to get out before it's too late. Don't let anyone tell you that it's your fault or that you deserve it. You deserve to be treated with respect and love. If someone raises a hand to you, it's never okay. Leave, and don't look back. Story number 8. Okay, here are 2 dating horror stories, framed as personal accounts with elements inspired by real-life stories and Reddit threads. I've focused on making them psychologically unsettling and emotionally resonant. I learned a valuable lesson that day about how easily trust can be manipulated. Story 1. The Vanishing Act, inspired by a true case. I know everyone says it won't happen to me, but it did. This is a true story, the kind you see on Dateline. I met Liam on Hinge. He was charming, a little nerdy, and genuinely seemed interested in what I had to say. We talked for weeks before meeting, building a rapport. He worked as a software engineer, loved hiking, and was a volunteer at a local animal shelter. He seemed normal. Our first date was perfect. We went to a cozy Italian place, laughed until our stomachs hurt, and walked along the river afterward. He kissed me goodnight, and I felt that fluttery feeling I hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on adventures, hiking in the mountains, visiting art museums, trying new restaurants. He was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely invested in getting to know me. He even met my best friend, Sarah, who gave him the thumbs up. Then, things started to get off. Subtly at first. He started being vague about his weekends, saying he was busy with work. He'd cancel plans last minute, offering flimsy excuses. He became less communicative, taking hours to respond to texts. I chalked it up to stress, assuming he was going through something. I tried to be understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One Saturday, we were supposed to go to a concert. He texted me that morning saying he had a family emergency and had to cancel. I was disappointed, but understanding. I texted him later that night, asking if everything was okay. No response. Sunday passed. Still nothing. Monday, silence. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I started to panic. I texted Sarah, telling her what was happening. She suggested we do some digging. We started with his work. I found the company he claimed to work for online, called their HR department, and asked if they had an employee named Liam. They didn't. That's when the bottom dropped out of my world. We then dug deeper. The animal shelter? He wasn't a volunteer. His social media presence? Minimal and recently created. It was all a lie. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since he hadn't threatened me or stolen anything. He had just vanished, like he never existed. It turns out he was using a fake name, fake job, everything fake. I learned later, after a lot of my own research, that he was likely a con artist, possibly with a history of similar behavior. He probably targeted women like me, successful, independent, but also lonely and looking for connection. The worst part isn't just the embarrassment or the feeling of being completely duped. It's the constant fear that he's still out there, doing the same thing to someone else. It's the feeling that I can never fully trust anyone again. I learned a valuable lesson that day about how easily trust can be manipulated, and I'm forever changed. This wasn't just a bad date, it was a carefully constructed deception that left me emotionally scarred. I now question everything and everyone. Story 2, The Mirror Image, based on several real-life catfishing stories. I met Mark on a gaming forum. We bonded over our love of RPGs and anime. He was funny, intelligent, and understood my nerdy sense of humor in a way no one else ever had. We spent hours chatting online, sharing our hopes, fears, and dreams. He lived in another state, but we made plans to meet up someday. He sent me pictures of himself, tall, dark-haired, with piercing blue eyes. He was exactly my type. We talked every day for months. I fell hard. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was emotionally supportive, always there to listen when I was having a bad day. He even helped me through a tough time at work. I confided in him about everything. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. Then he started asking for money. Small amounts at first. He claimed he was having trouble with his car, needed money for textbooks, or had a medical emergency. I sent him what I could. I wanted to help him. I trusted him. But the requests kept coming, and the amounts kept getting larger. Red flags everywhere. I wanted to ignore it, but it was too much. I finally confronted him. I told him I couldn't send him any more money. He got angry, accusing me of not caring about him. He said he needed the money to come visit me. I refused. That's when he threatened me. He said he knew things about me, things I hadn't told anyone else. He said he would expose my secrets to my family and friends if I didn't give him what he wanted. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I told my brother what happened. He helped me do some reverse image searches on the photos Mark had sent me. It turns out they were stock photos, stolen from some random model's online portfolio. Mark wasn't who he said he was. He was a catfish, and he had been manipulating me for months. I went to the police and blocked him on everything. It was hard, really hard. I had invested so much time and emotion into this relationship, even if it was only online. It felt like a real betrayal. I felt stupid, naive, and utterly humiliated. I learned a valuable lesson that day about the dangers of online relationships and how easily people can create false identities. The worst part? It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional damage. The feeling that I had been completely used and exploited. The fact that I had opened myself up to someone who wasn't even real. It took me a long time to trust anyone again. And honestly, I'm still not sure if I ever will. These experiences are more common than people think. These stories are real in that they are real-life scenarios that happen every day, that have happened in recent years and continue to happen, and these stories should be taken seriously. Story number 9. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but looking back, the fact that his profile picture was a heavily filtered, almost cartoonish version of himself should have been my first clue. I was fresh out of a long, emotionally draining relationship and decided to try online dating. Hinge seemed less overtly hookup-oriented than Tinder, so I made a profile. Mark, or Marky Mark as he called himself, messaged me almost immediately. He was complimentary, a little too complimentary maybe, showering me with praise for my eyes, my smile, even the way I described my favorite book. This first story is based on a compilation of true events reported on Reddit and other online forums, where individuals have experienced discrepancies between online profiles and real-life encounters. We chatted for about a week, and he seemed enthusiastic. He wanted to know everything about me, what I ate for breakfast, my childhood dreams, my deepest fears. It felt intense, but also flattering. I was starved for attention, and he was giving it to me in spades. We made plans to meet for coffee on a Saturday afternoon. When I saw him waiting outside the cafe, I almost didn't recognize him. The filter had shaved off at least 20 pounds and smoothed out every line and blemish. The man standing before me was heavier, older looking, and not nearly as vibrant as his profile suggested. I tried to be polite. It's just coffee, I told myself. 1 hour, and then I can go home. But the coffee date turned into a 3-hour interrogation. He talked almost exclusively about himself, his ex-wife, his difficult children, his boss who didn't appreciate him. Every story was a sob story, and every sentence ended with a sigh. I tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, but he always brought it back to his woes. Then, things took a turn for the truly bizarre. He started talking about conspiracy theories, the government controlling our minds, aliens living among us. I tried to laugh it off, but he was dead serious. His eyes darted around the cafe, and he lowered his voice conspiratorially. I excused myself to go to the bathroom and texted my friend, begging her to call me with a fake emergency. When I came back, he was gone. Relief washed over me until I saw a note scrawled on a napkin. "They're watching you too. Trust no one." I ran out of the cafe and didn't stop until I was safely back in my apartment. I blocked his number and deleted my Hinge profile. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced he was watching me. I know it sounds crazy, but the intensity of his gaze and the paranoia in his voice had truly unnerved me. It was a relatively harmless experience in the grand scheme of things, but it completely soured me on online dating. The idea that someone could so easily create a false persona and prey on vulnerable people still haunts me. This second story draws inspiration from real-life dating stories that have emerged in recent years, focusing on instances of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. The second story, however, is one that still leaves me awake at night. It feels too real to tell, but someone needs to know. I met Liam on a dating app called OkCupid. His profile was thoughtful and witty, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We messaged back and forth for a few weeks, and I found myself drawn to his intelligence and his seemingly genuine empathy. He was studying to be a therapist and was incredibly insightful about my own insecurities and anxieties. He was exactly the kind of person I thought I wanted to be with. We went on a few dates, and each one felt like a dream. He was attentive, charming, and incredibly understanding. He listened intently to everything I said, and he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better. I fell hard, and I fell fast. Within a month, we were spending almost every night together. He'd cook dinner, we'd watch movies, and we'd talk for hours. It felt like I had finally found my soulmate. But then, slowly, subtly, things started to change. He began to criticize me, initially in a gentle, helpful way. He'd point out flaws in my logic, suggest ways I could improve my communication skills, and offer constructive criticism on my appearance. At first, I brushed it off. I thought he was just trying to help me become a better version of myself. But the criticisms became more frequent and more pointed. He'd make snide remarks about my weight, my clothes, my friends. He'd tell me I was being too sensitive or too dramatic whenever I got upset. He isolated me from my friends and family, telling me they didn't understand me and that they were holding me back. He convinced me that he was the only one who truly cared about me and that I needed to trust him completely. I started to doubt myself, my judgment, and my sanity. I felt like I was walking on eggshells around him, constantly trying to avoid saying or doing anything that would upset him. One night, we were at a party, and I was talking to an old friend. Liam came over and pulled me aside, his eyes blazing with anger. He accused me of flirting with my friend and of embarrassing him in front of everyone. He said I was being disrespectful and inconsiderate, and that I didn't appreciate everything he did for me. I tried to defend myself, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept yelling and berating me until I burst into tears. We left the party, and he didn't speak to me the entire way home. When we got back to my apartment, he locked me inside and left. I sat there alone in the dark, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt lost, confused, and utterly broken. I knew deep down that something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to leave him. I was so emotionally dependent on him that the thought of being alone terrified me. This is the type of real-life dating horror that happens, but it's not talked about. Dating nowadays is scary. It's a facade. No one is really who they say they are. It scares me to think what can come from a dating app. The next few months were a blur of emotional abuse and manipulation. He'd apologize for his behavior, promising to change, only to repeat the cycle again and again. He gaslighted me, twisted my words, and made me feel like I was going crazy. I started experiencing panic attacks and severe anxiety. I lost weight, stopped sleeping, and became a shell of my former self. Finally, one day, I woke up and realized I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. It took weeks of planning and mustering all my courage, but I managed to break up with him. I changed my number, moved to a new apartment, and cut off all contact. It's been years since then, and I'm still trying to heal from the trauma. I suffer from PTSD and have a hard time trusting people. I've been in therapy for years, trying to unravel the damage he inflicted on my psyche. Some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by his face and his words. I never thought someone who claimed to love me could be so cruel and manipulative. The worst part is, I still don't fully understand why he did it. Was he a narcissist? A sociopath? Or just a deeply damaged person who projected his own insecurities onto me? I may never know the answer, and that's perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The world of dating is scary. These aren't even half the horror stories there are. The internet is a dark place to find love. I advise people to stay away from it or take extreme precautions when using dating apps. Story number 10. I used to think these stories were made up, until it happened to me. This is a true story, and honestly, writing it down is the first time I've really tried to process it. I was 24, fresh out of a bad breakup, and convinced that swiping through dating apps was the answer to all my problems. Stupid, I know. I matched with this guy, Liam. He was conventionally attractive, had a good job, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for a couple of weeks, and everything felt easy. Too easy, maybe. But I ignored that little voice in the back of my head. Our first date was at a cozy Italian restaurant. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for hours, and I left feeling like I had finally met someone who truly saw me. It was intoxicating. We started seeing each other regularly, and things moved quickly. Within a month, I was spending most nights at his apartment. He was sweet, considerate, and made me feel safe and loved. Or so I thought. The first red flag was subtle. He started getting jealous, but I initially brushed it off as him being protective. If a male friend texted me, he'd ask who it was and what we were talking about. If I was out with my girlfriends, he'd call and text incessantly as seal, wanting to know where I was and who I was with. It was annoying, but I told myself it was just because he cared. Then the controlling behavior escalated. He started criticizing my clothes, telling me I was showing too much skin. He'd question my decisions, telling me I wasn't thinking clearly. He isolated me from my friends, subtly planting seeds of doubt in my mind about their intentions. I remember one night I was supposed to go out with my best friend, Sarah. Liam started a fight with me right before I was about to leave, accusing me of not caring about him and prioritizing my friends over him. I tried to reason with him, but he just kept escalating, yelling and throwing things. I was so shaken that I ended up canceling on Sarah. That was the turning point. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't normal, that I was in an unhealthy and potentially dangerous situation. But I was also scared. I was emotionally dependent on him, and the thought of leaving him terrified me. He'd convinced me that I was nothing without him, that no one else would ever love me. One evening, I decided to go through his phone when he was in the shower. I know it was wrong, but I needed to know if my instincts were right. What I found was horrifying. He had been messaging multiple other women, saying the same things he'd said to me. He was a master manipulator, preying on vulnerable women and using the same tactics to control them. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't know how. I was terrified of what he might do if he found out I knew. The next day, I packed a bag while he was at work. I took only the essentials and left a note explaining that I was leaving and didn't want to be contacted. I went to Sarah's house, shaking and crying, and told her everything. She was furious and supportive, offering me a place to stay and helping me get a restraining order against Liam. It took months to recover from the emotional trauma of that relationship. I went to therapy, reconnected with my friends, and slowly started to rebuild my life. I'm still cautious about dating, but I've learned to trust my instincts and recognize the red flags early on. It was a horrific experience, but it taught me a valuable lesson about self-worth and the importance of healthy boundaries. This next one is also a true story I read on Reddit a while ago and still haunts me. I think it was back in 2019 or 2020 when online dating became even more popular. A woman, let's call her Emily, matched with this guy, Mark, on Bumble. He seemed normal enough, a bit nerdy maybe, but otherwise harmless. They went on a couple of dates, and Emily said there was nothing particularly wrong with him, but she just didn't feel a spark. So she politely told him she wasn't interested in pursuing anything further. He seemed to take it okay, wished her well, and that was that. Or so she thought. A few weeks later, Emily started noticing strange things happening. Her social media accounts were getting hacked. She was receiving weird and unsettling messages from anonymous profiles, and she even found a creepy doll left on her doorstep. She initially dismissed it as a coincidence or some random internet trolls, but the incidents kept escalating. One night, Emily was home alone when she heard a noise outside her window. She peeked through the curtains and saw a figure standing in her yard, staring up at her house. It was Mark. She immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The police took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened her or trespassed on her property. Emily was terrified. She installed security cameras, changed her locks, and tried to stay with friends as much as possible. But Mark was persistent. He continued to harass her online, sending her disturbing messages and posting compromising photos of her on fake social media accounts. The worst part was that he seemed to know everything about her. He knew her daily routine, her friends' names, even her passwords. It was like he was always watching her. Emily felt like she was losing her mind. She was constantly on edge, afraid to leave her house, afraid to answer the phone. She went back to the police multiple times, but they kept saying there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. It wasn't until Mark actually broke into Emily's house that the police finally took her seriously. He was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. During the investigation, they discovered that Mark had been obsessively tracking Emily for months, using spyware and other illegal methods to monitor her every move. It turned out he had a history of stalking and harassing women who had rejected him. Emily's story is a chilling reminder of the dangers of online dating and the importance of being aware of the red flags. It's also a stark illustration of how easily technology can be used to stalk and harass someone, even without physically being present. The fact that this happened in real life is terrifying. If you're still here, then maybe you already knew. Some dates don't end with love. Some end with silence. Some with something far worse. Thank you for listening to Hollow Testament. These stories were shared so they wouldn't be forgotten. If one of them left a mark, subscribe and join us again for the stories that no one else dares to tell, because not all testaments are holy.